We're having a great conversation.
I'm sorry.
We'll take questions after.
So if you don't mind, we'll start in stereophony. This new session in the Aesthetic Perspective series. My name is Serge Cardinal. I'm a professor here at the University of Montreal in the Art History and Film Studies department. I'm glad to be your host today. Unfortunately, as you can see, Abby Rees could not make it. So two speakers today. Our first speaker, Brianne Cohen, from now University of Colorado. Am I right? Okay. Her research interests include contemporary art and visual culture, but at the intersection, as I understand, of political problems, global migration, state violence, and so on, ecology. And her paper is still has the same title as I can see and read. The Vanishing-Point, Google Vision and the Civil Imagination.
Yes. Thank you so much. Let's see if I can turn this on. Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so with that, let me start. Don't look away. This is what the artist Öyvind Fahlström plead with an audience of strangers who look at a single dead olive tree on screen. In the video, The Vanishing-Point from 2015, the Israeli pair investigates the death of this transplanted Mediterranean tree, which simply could not survive the harsh winters in Brussels. Yet the video's complex 28-minute narrative implies that the tree fell victim to state power as the casualty of a mass crime. The olive tree died neither an immediate nor a spectacular death. In a mirror, its demise was an act of atrocity at the heart of Europe, a heart of glass. It acted as a quote-unquote mirror tree for the couple, two Israeli immigrants and quote-unquote newcomers uninvited to Brussels around the same time. The video story not only connects the tree to contentious state politics concerning Israel-Palestine and the European Union, but it also refracts and mediates these politics through the lens of the original biblical myth of Adam and Eve, aka Effie and Amir, and the Tree of Knowledge. In the video, the artist offered numerous panoramic camera angles on the tree from its 2005 planting to its eventual decease in the winter of 2012. They documented with the aid of both handheld out-of-focus bad cameras, as the video explains, as well as Google Earth and Google Street View imaging. The video includes diegetic sound and lines of text, but no voiceover. At times, it also suggests an outside user who clicks through the Google imaging software. Though these programs offer a type of feigned visual movement through different scales and locations, they are in fact composed solely of still digital photographs taken from publicly accessible databanks of satellite and aerial imagery. Photography scholars often focus on the unsettling speed of these geoinformational technologies, but the Vanishing-Point highlights their slowness. To be sure, the video demands that viewers register a type of slow violence caught in the fabric of such imaging. I borrow the term slow violence from eco-postcolonial theorist Rob Nixon to describe environmental destruction, such as global warming, which is spatially and temporally much more difficult to represent than spectacular violence. In what follows, I will demonstrate how the Vanishing-Point creates discrepant imaging through Google Earth, Street View, and video work in order to suggest, on the one hand, the limits of knowledge production through such global surveillance technologies, and on the other hand, to present a picture of slow violence concerning this tree's death. In doing so, the artists ultimately advocate an approach of violence prevention through civil imagination. In civil imagination, a political ontology of photography, photography theorist Ariella Azoulay asserts that spectators must resist acts of atrocity through a process of civil imagination, which put simply is to, quote, imagine a civil discourse under conditions of regime-made disaster, end quote. While Azoulay focuses on the failure of nation states such as Israel to prevent violence, civil imagination is an idea that can extend to other forms of mass subjectivity and union, where publics must acknowledge their own culpability in perpetuating political violence through social attitudes and hierarchies. The Vanishing Point attempts to catalyze a self-reflexive public awareness of such civil responsibility. Spectators and users must become more versant in gathering information, not only from photographs, as Azoulay advocates, but also from the newer, complex field of photography-based compound optical systems, such as Google Street View and Google Earth. A plural civil gaze is required in order to better navigate and understand the authentic artifice, so to speak, of these imaging systems. Where to begin looking? To introduce the crime scene, the Vanishing Point opens with a red inverted teardrop-shaped Google Maps pin in the midst of nothing. And I'll show you a couple minutes here of this video at the beginning. The line of text declares, let us begin from the middle. It is a start, as good as any other. Now you can see Google Earth is zooming in down on Brussels. Now it's zooming in on the European quarter, where the European Parliament and Commission are located, which is why Brussels is known as the heart of Europe, so to speak. And this is Leopold Park. Parliament is right there, and then on the other side of the park, in fact, is the Google office headquarters in Brussels. And as we're zooming on the upper left-hand corner, you can see there's a patch of dirt with something missing. That's where the olive tree was, before it was uprooted. It died. So within 3 minutes, gravity, aestheticized by cameras, has snatched us from an orbital spaceship position down to the site of the future crime, where we are informed in our present time that something happened. The disorientation of this procedure highlights the cracks and gaps of Google imaging and mapping technologies. Google Earth does not produce its own imagery. Photographs it uses for its remarkable scope of coverage are not standardized. Google utilizes satellite photographs for long distance and aerial shots for lower-lying pictures of the Earth. It purchases these materials from companies such as Digital Globe and GeoEye, which are major contractors of high-resolution satellite imaging for the US government. At a distance, architect Laura Kurgan skillfully highlights the disjunctions and ambiguities of visual systems such as Google Earth within an apparently productive climate of what she calls growing global transparency. She insists that when we interpret such images, we must realize that they are always already contextualized within certain institutional, governmental, or here military frameworks, which render the meaning of such images negotiable. They may seem direct, neutral, and objective, but this is an illusion. The Vanishing Point not only delves into the crime scene, but also this composite photographic system. Without any clear locational starting point, it goes straight to the heart of Europe, a garden. Effie and Amir explained that they had recently arrived in Brussels when they shot this initial footage of the olive tree, which you see here, and that they didn't know what to call things anymore. Thus they, quote, had to give them names like the first man did. We had to find our way in this brave new world. In the video, a computer cursor grabs the pegman and from it pulls out an unorthodox second pegman. Here the vanishing point begins to hint at the tale of Adam and Eve, one pegman emerging from the rib of another. Amidst the dull gray background and a few basic directional lines, an icon of a tree pops up between the figures, evoking the tree of knowledge from this narrative. Amidst the dull gray, the gray turns into green, and suddenly this brave new world begins to sprout and take geographical shape. At another point, a line of text states, back then, Google Street View was still a future plan, the world not yet created. Knowledge was a tiny bit less known. References to the tree of knowledge continue throughout the video. Later, for example, the two yellow pigmen are picked up by a cursor, dropped onto a Google mapping screen, and merged with a street view of a couple in the park. It says, there's always a couple in the garden. There's always a couple leaving the garden. Eyes opened. Humankind's original quest for the seeds of knowledge plays out here through the all-encompassing, universal lens of Google Vision. The video clearly pictures the couple, the garden, and the main character of the story, the olive tree. But it leaves the question of a crime up in the air. Instead, what emerges is the photogenic element of institutional power, as the video's text coyly describes it. This includes both a reflection of and on the apparatus itself, the Google visualization technologies, as well as the park's neighborhood, the governing heart of glass of the European Union. Through point-and-click movement, Google Street View's omniscient user guides viewers in front of the European Parliament's glass facades. Yet the user cannot capture his or her reflection in the panes, unlike the artist's mirror tree. It says, nor could we see what was behind them. Transparency is, by definition, invisible. This statement recalls Kurgan's skepticism of a growing global transparency, of digital photographic imagery that is newly democratized and accessible for all online, but that has been configured historically and often invisibly by institutional, governmental, or military frameworks. Not neutral and never quite transparent for citizen netizens. Unsurprisingly, what we do not see is a complex web of politics surrounding the tree's planting, one that the video suggests through textual description. Officially, the olive tree was planted in order to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the murder of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a controversial figure in the longer history of Israeli-Palestinian politics. And though olive branches are a symbol of peace for many, the commemorative planting of the tree recalls a lasting failed attempt at peace in the Middle East. It is a sad fact that the olive tree in Leopold Park, shipped from its indigenous Mediterranean landscape, lived a mere 7 years in the inhospitable climate of Brussels, when the species may live for hundreds, even thousands of years. The resilient olive tree also holds special, even sacred significance in both Islam and Judaism. Yet in contemporary times, it is a fraught marker of enforced Palestinian displacement from their homesteads. Israel has raised tens, if not hundreds of thousands of olive trees in order to eliminate this important source of income for Palestinians. Such slow socio-environmental violence attempts to dismantle not only the lives, but also the livelihoods of those citizens it deems second class and disposable. Moreover, this particular tree site in Leopold Park, Brussels, recalls a longer history of human genocide and environmental disasters committed by King Leopold II in its ex-colony, the Congo Free State. In text at the end, the vanishing point overtly points to the park's history and namesake. A park at the heart of the European corridor in Brussels may seem isolated from these histories of direct and slow violence, but the video insinuates otherwise. If nothing else, it has been touched by a longer historical wave of refugees and immigrants, or newcomers uninvited, like Effie and Amir, seeking shelter from such acts of aggression in the Middle East and Africa. For example, the video's text observes that Europa seems so popular. It refers to a celebratory bronze statue of Europa that stands triumphantly, unifying the masses below her waist and holding a large sign of the euro banknote above her head. Presented to the Parliament by the Belgian presidency of the EU in 1993, this grandiose figure symbolizes the early promise of greater European integration. Yet, as the cursor points and clicks on various parts of her figure, two-dimensional planes refract and distort her body in disorienting directions. It resembles fragile glass planes that can be tipped and tilted in various ways. And suddenly her solid 3D bronze base looks more like a set of precarious 2D funhouse mirrors. The vanishing points play with mirrors, lenses, and images of self-reflection, questions the apparent solidity and authority of the reigning European project. It does so through the optical fragmentation and distortion of the recent dominant system of visuality established by Google during the same time, which has created a whole new world to be measured, charted, named, and known. Earth and Street View may appear to offer an omniscient viewing position and seamless, transparent access to the raw data of Earth's surface, but this will always be an artifice. The work attempts to highlight this fact with the apt title, The Vanishing Point. No longer do we inhabit a world animated by the human optical mastery and control of European Renaissance single-point perspective. There is no vanishing point to imply an omniscient, idealized, live viewer. This privileged way of seeing and knowing the world for centuries through the projects of European Enlightenment and colonialism is dismantled through the fragmentation of totalizing contemporary optical systems such as Google Earth and Street View. Effie and Amir worked to expose the limits of such a hubristic attitude towards viewing and knowing the world in its full scope. To the original garden and parable of Adam and Eve, as well as the garden and institutional authority of the European Union. Through such a complex imaging system, moreover, what Effie and Amir attempted to depict are composite, multiple events of photography. Photography theorist Ariella Azali critically emphasizes the need to recognize what she calls the event of photography rather than the photographed event. In doing so, one does not treat the photograph as a static shot arising primarily through the authority of the photographer, but rather one investigates many actors involved in the political process of image making, including the photographer, subject, camera, and any and all spectators viewing it in the aftermath of its original creation. Really implicate these multiple agents throughout the vanishing point. Themselves, various objects and subjects in the park, diverse cameras, and ourselves, the spectators led through the artwork's user-centric interface, emphasized by computer cursors and clicks. In the vanishing point, however, the event of photography are entangled and difficult to unpack when thinking and moving, so to speak, through composite photography-based digital programs such as Google Earth and Street View. Overlapping times involved. Many more events of photography stitched together into one totalizing image. Thus, when investigating such a temporally and spatially expansive, messy field of actions and agents, a plural civil gaze is required in turn. Understanding this mass crime and its durational violence, and hopefully preventing such slow violence in the future, calls for collective viewing and civil responsibility, including viewers from Brussels and Jerusalem to online viewers and users from around the world. The artist's plea, "Don't look away," indicates that this image portrays a gruesome atrocity of the status quo. The artist declared, "This is not guilt, this is convention. Trees die every day due to human hubris, interference, and ecological ignorance. Olive trees have been raised by the hundreds of thousands in order to implement ideological agendas. For ages, wilderness has been tamed into beautiful gardens for human pleasure, like Belgium's original Malbec Valley. And countless immigrants from the Southern Hemisphere, such as Effie and Amir themselves, are treated as newcomers uninvited to Europe. These are normal states of affair, part of habit and custom, and often more invisible to the naked eye. The vanishing point does not aim to establish guilt for the tree's death, but rather to present the status quo and its moral ambiguities. Investigating the death of this tree is like a querying of the fall of Adam and Eve's original mythical tree, the foundation of all knowledge of good and evil. No answers, no established guilt, and no clear resolution, certainly not with the aid of Google photographic imaging. In suggesting a picture of slow violence through multiple events of photography, Vanishing-Point warns of the need for violence prevention. If masses of spectators truly look with a civil gaze and act with a civil imagination, then political injustices by the state might be countered, reversed, and prevented from enduring in the form of slow violence. We may not be able to account for and judge the full range of actors' actions and processes that led to the tree's killing, but investigating the complex spatiotemporal web that initially laid the groundwork for its death with all the compound visual systems available to us in the digital information era may save the life of its neighbor.
Thank you very much, Brianne, for this politically challenging reading of Google Vision. If you agree, we'll hold our questions, and we will hear first our next speaker, if you don't mind. Our next speaker is Bäckström, professor in comparative literature at Karlstad University in Sweden. He has published many books, one on the Henri Michaud, French poet, one on experimental poetry, and the last one is entitled Decentering the Avant-Garde. I'm right? Works. And it's still entitled Mediatized Authenticity. How do we pronounce this? Fahlström performance, Kisses Sweeter Than Wine.
Thank you. Performance art is firmly rooted in the here and jetzt, here and now, asserted by Walter Benjamin as the only remaining condition for the aura. As Philip Auslander observes, every performance is always already mediatized in one way or another. Live performance now often incorporates mediatization to the degree that the live event itself is a product of media technologies. This has been the case to some degree for a long time, of course. As soon as electric amplification is used, one might say that an event is mediatized. Still, we do experience authenticity when we visit the live performance, which seems to be paradoxical, but which can be explained by our too large attention to the construction of the artwork, which makes us miss the obvious fact that art is not the work of something, a construction or an artifact, but rather the act of putting it there, an event rather than strictly an object, which is what characterizes so much of the American art world since the 1950s, where, in the spirit of Duchamp and John Cage, performance trumps composition. As a famous Canadian pointed out, media and technology has been part of the development of the human species since the first human grabbed a stone or stick and used it as an extension of man. We are therefore so used with media and technology that we do not even see it, not even with our glasses on. Therefore, it's not strange that researchers, when they start to notice that books are printed with ink on paper, performances take place on a stage with amplifiers, and so on, can't escape the new obsession with media and technology, and see that these two fields do not necessarily constitute a dichotomy to authenticity, but can be co-producers of it. To react on something demands that it becomes visible. This happened when the historical avant-garde was born out of the insight that art had become disconnected from both life and society by l'art pour l'art, at least in Peter Bürger's version. And the same was true with the rise of the neo-avant-garde and their elaborated use of new media in the 50s. At the same time, we can see the growth of media theory. The focus on media has only increased since then, and as you all know, in the wake of this boom, intermedia studies was recently born, or recently, 20 years as we know now. But at the same time, this focus might obscure the relation between media technology and the demand for authenticity in live performance. The avant-garde, in a continuation of the praxis of the historical avant-garde, used effects and included media in their performances to lay bare their devices to an even higher degree, in a refutation of the idea that live and performance are totally unmediatized phenomena and therefore transparent. So I will discuss this refutation by using one of the neo-avant-gardists that were a forerunner for mediatized art, the Swedish artist Öyvind Fahlström. To do this, I have to introduce him, his main co-partner, the Swedish engineer Billy Clyver, and Fahlström's performance Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, 1966. And this will be more of a presentation since I just the last day went into the La Fondation Langlois, find material from a lot of material and written stuff about the performances which has not been available to me, since I need a statement from the critics and the audience. The Swedish concrete poet artist Öyvind Fahlström is one of few internationally renowned Swedish artists in the 20th century. He published what seems to be the world's first manifesto for concrete poetry in 1954. And at the same time tried out the different aesthetic strategies promoted in the manifesto in poems written at the same time, but not published until more than 10 years later. Boulder. As a promoter of the neo-avant-garde in Sweden in the 50s and 60s, Fahlström transgressed the borders of different arts and genres, as well as different media, when he, for example, put together 2 radio compositions in the early 60s. Fåglar i Sverige, 1963, and then Helge Torsten Nilsson in 5 parts, broadcast in 1966. These 2 radio compositions are complex media collages, where recorded sounds from reality, radio, and TV are mixed into an acoustic narrative tied together with the use of a voice-over performed by himself in the studio. With these 2 plays, Fahlström was an early forerunner of today's digital mixed media world, and they are prime examples of the process of mediatization. Fahlström moved to New York in 1961. He soon acquired a central position together with Robert Rauschenberg, Klaus Oliver, John Cage, and others. He kept contact with Sweden and continued to be a strong stimulus for activities in Stockholm as well, which sheds light upon the fact that in the list of main avant-garde cities in the 1960s, both Stockholm and New York ranked in the top. To explain the impact of Fahlström in New York, it is necessary to present another Swedish expat, the engineer Billy Clyver. He introduced Fahlström in New York and helped him to get somewhere to live, which happened to be Robert Rauschenberg's old loft in Lower Manhattan. Performances and happenings all over the US, since the neo-avant-gardes were keen on exploring new technology, and therefore were in need of engineers and technicians. He acted as the mastermind in the American-Swedish exchange, where American artists came to Stockholm and Swedish artists visited in New York. Relationships with many of the most famous American artists, and he also frequently visited, for example, the factory and helped Andy Warhol with technical solutions. His fundamental idea was to connect artists and engineers for the art world and for engineering. He therefore terminated his employment at the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey, and they are big here too, I think, to start the company Experiments in Art and Technology, EAT, together with Rauschenberg and others in 1966. His premise was that engineers should not create art, but provide a technical means for the artists, who in their turn should not work directly with technology. It is in the meeting between the engineer and the artist something can happen that is creative for both partakers. In 1966, Fahlström and Klyver were asked if they could bring together prominent American artists to perform at the festival arranged by the Experimental Music Association Fylkingen in Stockholm. When the festival was cancelled, Fahlström and Klyver, together with Rauschenberg, organized a seminal series of performances and happenings entitled 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering in New York. The 9 evenings consisted of different performances which were organized by Robert Wittman, David Tudor, John Cage, Steve Bäckström, Alex Hay, Deborah Hay, Lucinda Childs, Robert Rauschenberg, and Yvonne Reiner. The performance series was not an immediate success, to express it politely, since it was too far ahead of its time, even for the experienced New York audience and for the technology that was possible to develop and use. 9 Evenings has therefore only retrospectively gained the fame it is worth as one of the landmarks of performance art. I will focus one of the 9 performances, Öyvind Fahlström's Kisses Sweeter Than Wine. To illustrate this heterogeneous performance, here is a clip where the sound is out of joint, though. Fahlström's performance took its name and its leitmotif from the Weavers' hit Kisses Sweeter Than Wine from 1950, which became an even larger success for Jimmy Rogers in 1957.
Well, when I was a young man and never been kissed, I got to thinking it over, how much I missed. So I got me a girl and I kissed her and then, oh, well, I kissed her again because she had
This song was only one of many mediatized pieces in the performance, a naive love song whose meaning was sharply contrasted by the overall critique of militarism and extinction of mankind by nuclear warfare, through precisely during the naive 50s. Kisses Sweeter Than Wine was a 9-part piece which was made up of various sketches and performances that was joined together without any narrative continuity. To give a rough idea of the heterogeneity of the performance, here is a brief list of the different parts. This list reveals that the plot is extremely complex, and one therefore has to have invented that the show was even more intricate and chaotic. What is listed is only a small part of what took place on stage. What the audience saw was multiple images, movies, objects, and live performances mediated at the same time. It was a split-screen performance avant la lettre, where the events only slowed down somewhat when the main character performed. Even then, it must have been hard to get an overview of the whole performance on stage. For example, Robert Rauschenberg played the 18th century autistic man Jedediah Bäckström, who despite his handicap could remember and repeat the most complex number, numbers, and you heard it in the beginning here in the clip. Rauschenberg was never seen live on stage though. He was filmed head-on with a closed-circuit camera and screen at the background of the stage. The overall use of mediatization in the performance and how performed authenticity already is mediated in some way or another. Kisses Sweeter Than Wine evolves for its time modern technology and displays live and filmed events, pictures, movie excerpts, among others, to create the overwhelming experience or the audience testified to afterwards. To understand the way Fahlström worked when he created his pieces, it's necessary to scrutinize the variety of material sources for his show, but the performers on stage are only a small, if important, part. Fahlström made use of video, audio tape, film and slide projectors to create a disjointed theatrical narrative. For example, the frogman was hit by arrows shot by an archer and winched up to the ceiling in the first part. And in the second, a giant head of President Lyndon Johnson was revealed by an artist unwrapping it, while in the sixth, a remotely controlled rocket was floating around on its own in the saloon, as you saw in the clip. To understand the use of mediatization, I will focus is filmed happening Mao Hope March 1966. Originally made for Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, but in 1973 presented as an independent work of art. In this film, Fahlström and his compañeros carries large posters with Bob Hope and Chairman Mao, while someone is asking bystanders the question, "Are you happy?" This means that already in the film happening we have different layers of intermediality. Photos are enlarged and held up as demonstration posters. Interviews are recorded and made part of the film, and even the demonstration itself is given new meaning in the mediation process as an art event. When this film is included in the performance Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, the mediation reaches another level. Since then, this art film now partakes in the narrative of the much longer performance. So the film happening Mao Hope March becomes an integral part of the performance Kisses. The posters, which were central in the happening, also are physically present in the performance. The situation becomes rather complex. The somewhat nonsensical happening retrieves new meaning as part of the performance, since the general chaos in the latter paradoxically makes the rationale of Mao Hope March clearer. And before I conclude, I want to remind you that Mao Hope March is only one single instance of mediation in Kisses Sweeter Than Wine out of a multitude. 9 Evenings theater and technology was far ahead of its time, both politically and aesthetically. A minor fiasco. Like many of previous projects, the technology did not always behave, and some parts of the show were rather chaotic. But when the first impressions settled in the years that followed, and technology and aesthetics caught up with Fahlström and Klüver, a massive re-evaluation of 9 Evenings in art and performance history has taken place. Klüver's amalgamation of theatre and engineering turned out to be extremely productive. And these and other experiments in the 60s are important links in the genealogy of today's network, global and multi-screen world, since they constitute early confluences of cybernetics, art and media. At the same time, Kisses shows that mediatization not necessarily eliminates the authenticity of a performance. Fahlström's performance rather insists on its authenticity, despite its heavy mediation and mediatization. In this way conforming to the observation of Walter Wong about spontaneity in secondary orality, here articulated by Auslander. Paradoxically, the most successfully spontaneous forms of performance may be those in which spontaneity is relatively planned and predictable. Fahlström's performance was highly planned, and even though the technology did not work perfect, this was, according to one visitor, performance of all in the 9 Evenings series. The mediatized image of Robert Rauschenberg with his numbering of extremely high numbers, do work at the same level as seemingly spontaneous live acts. Both the mediatized performance and the live ones are effects that reveals the devices of the performance, but at the same time levels out differences between the many events on stage. So it becomes hard to recognize what is live and what is mediated and mediatized in this multimedia performance. In this way, Kisses questionings the very possibility of authenticity without mediation and mediatization, since everything that goes on is mediatized in one way or another. The only liveness that the audience can be sure of is its own. The only remaining liveness is therefore the interaction between the performance itself and the audience, as Ausland points out. Understood in this way, the experience of liveness is not limited to specific performer-audience interactions, but to a sense of always being connected to other people, of continuous technologically mediated co-presence with others known and unknown. In today's world with internet, Facebook and other social media, which have replaced the need for authenticity, with exactly this continuous technologically mediated co-presence with others known and unknown. Fahlström's Kisses Sweeter Than Wine was a precursor that showed that the mediatized and the live event function at the same level, and that they both create the feeling of authenticity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bäckström, for this most revealing intermediate portrait of an unknown artist. I'm sure that you have questions, you have reactions, you have suggestions, advices. Yeah.
Thank you both for your presentations. It's really interesting. So far in this conference, I had the impression, and I think I did the same in my paper yesterday, that with the theme of this conference being
Authenticity or artifact.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I clicked on myself. We tend to take those terms as opposite when they're actually more complementary than you think. And I think you both today in this panel on different topics showed how there's actually an authenticity in artifice and something true in mediation. So I was curious to hear you both on how you saw and find those two terms of the conference theme this week as opposite or
The same
kind of the same two faces of the same metal. Does that make sense?
Oh, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, I mean, the question with Google is that it gives us that sense of authenticity, but at the same time, it's so highly artificially constructed. You know, we think that we're in one totalized world, but then, you know, actually everything is put together in many, many different times and spaces. And so we feel like we're completely immersed, we're at the center of the world, and at the same time, we're completely, you know, chaotically thrown into that world, and we have no sense of agency. We have no vanishing point, that idealized central position anymore. You know, this extends back to in the 19th century, where you think that you're in the center, but you're also not. So yeah, it's a really absolutely. I think you bring up a really important point that it's always this kind of bridging together of these two ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah, the point of my paper was exactly the same. Since with Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, it's so obvious that it's a lot of mediatization going on in this, and it's very hard to actually. Now I only seen the DVD. If I've been there, it's been easier to talk about it. But since the DVD is mediated and it's more documentary than what you say. You can't reproduce a performance, it's impossible. It's always always in documentation. And also I
And what about the veracity of this documentation?
sorry?
What about the authenticity of that documentation?
Oh, yeah. It's another question, I think.
Okay.
So it's, yeah. No, but in my piece, this, I wrote about the Swedish poets with similarities to Allen Ginsberg, and I coined the term lyrical performance. It's not poetry reading, it's a lyrical performance, and so on. And then I was forced in a network to kind of develop this idea, and then I went from lyrical performance to rock music, and then to black metal. And it struck me then, and it was very obvious that authenticity is constructed. You have to agree to the conventions to actually like black metal if you go to a concert and so on. And if you don't do, you probably think it's ridiculous with all these kind of things. So it became very obvious that authenticity is constructed. It's conventions you have to adapt to, I think. And then artifice is not a dichotomy to authenticity.
Maybe I can follow up on that question about documentation, because, yeah, I mean, it's so highly mediatized. How did they possibly think about documenting it? Did they have a strategy? I mean, what were these artists thinking about at that time for audiences in the future to see this? Can you explain, were they thinking, oh, we'll just have this kind of chaotic, spontaneous event, and
Whatever happens, happens, and
right.
we don't care about the archives.
Exactly.
Or do they?
Yeah.
Actually,
Do they care about the
it was
documentation?
really clear that made it or arranged with a filming of the performance, and it was released as a DVD 30 years afterwards. So it was really in the archives before it went into first into a film, and then was on a DVD. So it's and it was meant as a documentation, I think, because I think it's hard if you discuss live performance. It's very hard to discuss the documentation. That's a separate document. It's not the performance itself. And
So
what I was trying to discuss here was
Fahlström never saw the documentation as part of his performance.
No, and I don't know if he even saw it, because he died in 1976. But he knew what really clear, so he might have seen it. But, that's why I insist that what the Benham is here and now is possible, because you can't reproduce performance. It's not possible.
Yes.
I haven't really got a question, but two really wonderful papers, and I think they fit together so interestingly. I know it was really interesting for me to really learn about those artists who I didn't know about. So thank you for that. I'm guilty that I'm not going to ask you a question about the artist. I know it's really annoying if you sit there in the theories and everybody's just asking about the artist, but I'm still intrigued. So firstly, I'd like to know a little bit more of the background of this filmmaker that you've worked with. Did she screen that? I mean, was that filmed off her actual monitor?
Yes.
I was trying to figure that out. So she's got a steady camera kind of like on that. What she's doing is straight, just kind of thinking, and I'm coming to the happening then in a minute, because I guess my idea about what you presented as the, documentation perhaps, they're kind of like more remainders, of that, and then you're trying to string them together, whereas this had all these things, linear filmic structure of fragmentation kind of happening inside, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they had, this is a pair, it's Effie and Amir, so it's a man and a woman.
Oh, see.
And they are from Israel, but they immigrated to Brussels, and they've been living there since 2005 when the tree was planted. And I'm not sure exactly how they filmed the Google vision, but I believe that it probably wasn't a camera straight on, that it was just taken from some kind of software on the computer that could, yeah, exactly. Did that with their own video footage of the tree that they took for 7 years off and on. And so it is in a linear format, it is, a video, but yet they try to make it cyclical by starting what they say in the middle, they don't know exactly where to start, and then they return to that at the very end. And then of course the whole time there's this fragmentation between the different types of imaging in order to raise these questions about Google vision and this totalizing image of the world. If that answers.
It does at the same time, you know, there's all this fragmentation that builds up all the time, actually breaking away, but kind of like builds up. It's nice to know that they do that as a structure across the whole firm.
Yeah, absolutely. And a central question in it was that image I didn't really explain, but where it shows the tree has been removed from the ground from the top image, from the satellite image of it, and yet on the ground it still lives in the street view image. So, you know, Google's saying that, you know, actually this happens at the exact same time, but there's this discrepancy here. And that's where they're really keying us into this, that Google's not truthful all the time.
You know, the interesting thing, and I'll just come to that. When I work with students, I always kind of like say, okay, where's the art? Yeah, and I think that brings in the question of documentation, because you had them happening, obviously, but what remains from there are all these bits, but probably they didn't aim at documentation as such. Whereas some artists of that time, the Tate in London, we just had this big Robert Rauschenberg exhibition. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. And I think they had some of the EAT there. But I think it was really hard to document that because they were really struggling to, you know, do a historical thing on it because there was so little material. Fascinating.
Yeah, he was part of ERT, so it must have been a lot about that.
But there was actually very little, but what was there was very fascinating.
Yeah,
it was actually frustrating.
Yeah, many artists, like land art and so on, is the documentation, is all everything you got left. Like Spire Object is now I heard it's coming up again, but it was lost in the sea. But the documentation, and that's why I have an idea about the avant-garde as processual and performance. It is the processuality that's important for the avant-garde. Because it's very clear with land art that since they document it very, they film and they take photos and they write down everything. But Fahlström is nothing like that. This was just a film for Billy Kluver, for the engineer actually, I think, to document what happened or what did not happen, since some things did not work as it should be. But so it's not part of his artwork, Fahlström's. So that's quite a difference. But still that's everything we have. That's all we have. And of course, in history, a lot of performances has gone lost, as you know, about Shakespeare reconstructing Shakespeare's The Globe and so on. The performances there, but you can only guess. But here, at least, we have some material that we can look into.
But somebody like Rauschenberg would have then probably taken that sign and put it in the gallery the next time around, isn't it? And then it would have become a different artwork because he would have kept it, and then something else would have become of it. Whereas people working in that very immaterial way, they just leave the scene.
It's very fascinating with this Mauerhof March. This was filmed and documented to be included in the performance. So that's a filmed event and so on. And of course, this. Are you happy? Are you happy? Somebody asking that to bypass us is rather interesting, I think. And actually, everybody told them, I'm happy. Which is very strange, since Denmark is supposed to be the most happy country in the world. This was in New York. So it's quite a difference between this Mauer March, which is filmed and made included, and then the documentary is not meant to be anything at all. Actually.
So I might shift the discussion a little bit, but I just wanted to really appreciate your presentation. And I really question about civic imagination and responsibility that you very strong comment towards in piecing this together, and so it's purely out of interest that I'd like you to expand a little bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah, civil imagination. This is something that Ariel Azoulay is really thinking a lot about recently in terms of real life politics in Israel and Palestine. She's very concerned about how photography can be used in a practical way in order to unearth atrocities that are being committed by the state in that region in particular. And so she's arguing that we need to not think about photograph as a static object, as something that has happened and that it is kind of put away. It's what the photographer was intending to say at that one moment. but instead we need to think about the larger process of making that image and the whole context surrounding it in terms of the photographer, all the subjects involved, all the cameras involved, and all the audiences from the moment it's taken up until the present day, in the future, all the people who are looking at it, and to recognize that there's a whole lot more different types of agency involved in making of this image. And so what she's in fact trying to do is give more agency to people who are categorized as victims or as refugees and put in these boxed categories, and instead make spectators think more critically about it and to try to gather more information about this whole event. So to not treat it as an aesthetic object, but instead to make it a political image making process. And the civil part is that, it's all these audiences in the present day who need to do that in a kind of collective way, and recognize these so-called victims who are subject to the photographer's cameras in Israel and Palestine, that they should be a part of the discourse as well, that they shouldn't be relegated to a kind of static objectification, station, that what we tend to do in photography studies.
And is it only about sensitivity? Could we say a civil sensitivity as well?
Sensitivity, yes, but not in the sense that we're being empathetic.
What we saw is all about perception. Do we see? Do we not see? Can we see?
Right. I guess it's the recognition that we have the privilege of viewing these people in disaster zones, that the people who are victims are being photographed many times without giving their own permission. They don't have any say in this. They're treated as second-class citizens, and we have to recognize our own privilege as first-class citizens in viewing them in this position. And so that's the kind of civil imagination we need. She contrasts this with the idea of empathy. We shouldn't be just empathizing with victims, so to speak, because that keeps them in that category, that relegates them still within that idea of victimhood. And this is something she's very critical of in terms of Susan Sontag regarding the pain of others. We can't treat them as others anymore. So in a sense, yeah, sensitivity is important, but she doesn't want to have that straddle line of empathy.
Is she close to Martha Nussbaum?
To
Martha Nussbaum? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
No. Because her political philosophy is based on moral sensitivity and imagination.
Right. She's definitely trying to think of
Love as
cosmopolitan.
Yeah. And what about ironic and humoristic reversal in this authenticity experience? In the performance we saw. We think ironic and humoristic reversal of everything, of engineering, of theater, of the stage, as a part in the authenticity experience, in the performance of Fahlström?
I don't know if he meant some parts are ironic and humorous, of course, but other are highly sincere, I think. Somebody that never smiled, but like an engineer or something.
Okay.
But I think he had a lot of humor since his project is from middle of the 1960s and until his death. It's very political. So he made maps of North America and so on, and the United States with the dollar sign and exploitation and so on. And and here he has a notion from Kessler, which is dissociation, that you take one thing and then they take something completely different and put it together and something and so on. So that's what he's trying to do here, I think. But of course, we think a lot of this is very funny when you see it, but it's might reverse the authenticity, I think, because humor is contradiction
in principle.
It is, yeah.
Do I understand that we are at the end of our journey? Thank you very much. It was wonderful. I think it's lunchtime, no? Or isn't it your turn now?
Since you asked. No, I was hoping to get back to the question. Sounds one other.
Too late.
I know. Let's try it on live.